Alright, so here we are in exercise 8, and we're going to be exploring effects, appearances, and graphic styles. Now, effects are very similar to other transformations in that they're going to take basic shapes and they're going to transform them into more complex objects in complex shapes. And so what I've done is I've given a big layout of essentially a similar shape, this circular shape, and we're going to just go through systematically and look at all the important effects that can be used in Illustrator. And so these are important because they cut down on the time that it takes to make a uniform transformation. And so that'll become more clear as we go through it. And just to note, anytime you apply an effect to an object, you can't really edit the points of that object until you expand the appearance. So we'll go over that as well. But just know that if you apply an effect, you won't be able to adjust any of the vector paths until you have expanded it. Okay, so let's get started. We'll come down over here. We'll start at this head over here. And what I'm going to do is make sure to just select this circular hair part and not the face. And then to find effects, we're going to come up to the application menu and find effect. And the effects we're going to go over in this exercise is the distort and transform and the stylize. So let's go to distort and transform, and let's just choose the first one. Free distort. This one's really similar to using our free transform tool, except it's giving us a preview of the vector path, and we have a bounding box that we can essentially move around parts of the shape. I'm not really a big fan of this effect because I think just using the free transform tool is a lot more effective, but some people like to do this just because you get a nice clean preview of how your shape is going to be affected. So I'll just do something like that and then click OK, and you can see that it has now affected that object. As I can see, as I hover over and preview the selection, it's still giving me the outline of the previous vector path. Okay, so this is almost like it's giving me a placeholder for how this effect is going to transform the shape. When I feel satisfied and I want to further edit the shape, I need to expand the appearance. So if I come up to Object and I come down to here, Expand Appearance, okay, now we can see that it is outlined that effect shape, and indeed if I come in here with my white arrow tool, I can start to pull around these points. Okay. So let's move on. I'll choose my black arrow and I'll choose the next one. Now for these next two, pucker and bloat, they work the best with multiple points. So if we look really closely at this shape, it's actually a large polygon with 20 sides. And I did that because it gives me more anchor points to affect. So we'll see how this works with the pucker and bloat effect. So I'll come up to Effect, Distort and Transform, Pucker and Bloat, and I'll go ahead and click the preview. And you can toggle between bloating, so it's basically taking the segment and bloating it out and pulling in the anchor points, and then we can go the other way. So now it's pulling out the anchor points and it's puckering or sucking in these segments. So find something that you like. I think for this one I'm going to do, let's do some kind of pucker for this one. So I'll do something like that, a -23. I'll click OK. And let's choose the next one. Let's go back to Effect, Distort and Transform, Pucker and Bloat, and this time we will do the opposite to this one. We will go the other direction, so we'll bloat it. Kind of looks like a flower. And click OK, and we'll move on to the next one. And click this shape. I'll go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and Roughen, and I'll click the preview. And as the name says, it's going to roughen the edge in somewhat of a random manner. So we can choose to have the size of how it's pushing and pulling the path. It could be more extreme, or it can be really subtle. We can add more levels of detail to this edge. You can see as I do that these become more prickly. We can even change the corner edges from corner to smooth, and if I take down the detail, I think you can see that a little bit better. And I think that's good for this one. Alright, let's come down over here and we'll choose this one, and now let's try a tweak. So Effect, Distort and Transform, and we'll pass the transform one and go to tweak. Let's click on the preview. This one's really similar to the roughen in that it's adjusting the edge and giving it kind of a random look. So this one has a few different settings where we can change how much we're going to push and pull the points on the vertical axis, and then how much we push and pull those on the horizontal axis. We can be really extreme or really subtle. Absolute tones it down a little bit, and then relative is the more extreme setting. We can also choose to not modify the anchor paths, so those will kind of stay locked in place. And you can kind of experiment with these other ones. I don't profess to understand the in and out control points quite yet. I think that's good right there. I'll click OK. All right, let's try this next one. So this next one is called twist, and it's hard to see what the twist does with a solid shape. So instead, I created a series of lines in a radial pattern, and I grouped them together. So now let's go up to the effect menu, distort and transform, and twist. And let's start with just a 10-degree angle and preview that. And you can see that's starting to twist it along its axis. So if I start to increase it, and now we can see it's twisting it from one end to the other end. I'll go ahead and go the other direction, so I'll do -100 and click on and off the preview. You can see it's going the other way now. And click OK, and move on to the next one. Okay, we'll click on this one and go to Effect, Distort and Transform, and Zigzag, and we'll preview that. So what this effect does is it takes the outside path and it creates a zigzag pattern along that outline. So this one is a very commonly used effect when creating graphics. So we can have these sharp points, or we can have smooth points. We can change the number of ridges per segment, and we can change the distance or the size of the star rays, the zigzag. So we'll kind of explore more with that in later exercises. I'll just click OK. And let's come over to the last Distort and Transform effect. I'll click this one. I'll go to Distort and Transform and go to Transform. Okay, so this is an effect that requires a little more explanation, and we will be exploring this more in a later exercise. What this effect does is it allows you to change the scale, the proximity, the rotation, and some other features of the shape all at once. So it's like doing multiple transformations at the same time. So let's go ahead and just kind of play around. I'll put on the preview and we'll change the scale. So let's do a wide horizontal scale and a small vertical, and we'll go ahead and move it a little bit and rotate it. And if we wanted to, we could actually make multiple copies of this transformation. So what it's doing when I make multiple copies is every copy, it's adding 33 degrees, it's adding a new move, and it's adding a new scale. So it's kind of multiplying whatever you're doing in this part over here. We'll go ahead and bring that back to 0, and I'll just click OK. And we will come back to that effect in later exercises. And let's come to another set of effects, the Stylize effects. Let's choose this one over here, the drop shadow, effect, stylize, drop shadow. We'll preview that, and it basically creates a shadow underneath the shape. This is a very, very commonly used effect for graphics, typography, icons, and user interface design. Try to become really familiar with using this if that is the kind of work you imagine yourself doing. So I can change the opacity, which is how much of that drop shadow we can see. So if I bring this down to, let's say, 10%, click and unclick the preview, you can see we get a little faint shadow. I'll bring that back up to 30%. I can change the offset, so this is along the X and Y axis, so it's like changing the lighting source. Have this go down or up. I think right there's about good. I can change the blur, so this is how much of the edge we're going to be able to see. If I increase this, okay, it starts to blur it out, and it starts to look more like a faint cloud behind it, almost like a glow. But if I make this really small, so 0, 1, click and unclick the preview, gives us a really hard edge. I'll just do 0.05. See how that looks. Yeah, that's good. I can also change the color, so I can have that shadow be more of a muted blue. I can have it be in the red spectrum, or I can switch over to just darkness. This is somewhat similar to the opacity, but it's just adding more black, or it's adding more white. It says spot colors may be shaded with black on overprint. I'll say OK. So that's working with drop shadows, and we'll be doing more with that effect in later exercises. All right, let's try the next one, feather. So effect, stylize, and feather. And what this is going to do is blur the edge. if I do preview, basically taking that edge, and the radius is how far this blurs towards the center of the shape. So if I increase this, the blur is going to get closer to the shape. If I decrease this, okay, the blur is going to get farther away from the center, and we're just going to get a subtle edge. So I'll just do 0.01. I'll do 0.1. All right, let's try the next one. So inner glow. So effect, stylize, inner glow. And we'll go over this in later exercises, but this is what's called the transparency mode. So I'll preview that. And I'll just change this to normal for now. We have the same thing. We have opacity, so how much of that color we can see. And basically the color is glowing from the outside and going in. So if I increase the blur, okay, that color is going to move towards the inside. If I wanted to, I could change this color. And I could actually just change it to a really dark color. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to pull that color from the outside towards the center. I could also flip it. I could have that color emanate from the inside and go towards the outside. In this case, I'll switch the color. Try a bright yellow. There we go. Actually, I'll bring up the blur a little bit. That looks good. Okay. So inner glow goes from the outside of the shape towards the center. The outer glow does the opposite. So I'll select the shape, effect, stylize, outer glow, and we'll preview that. And similar to the drop shadow, it's creating a shape of color on the outside of the path. So if I increase the blur, it's going to extend that out. If I decrease it, it'll pull it back in. I could change the color, so we could do something more of a glowing yellow, although that's hard to see on a white background. I'll change the mode to normal, and it's still hard to see. I'm actually going to let's try this yellow here, and I'll bring up the opacity. We can see that a little bit better. I'll bring it up to 100%, 100, and I'll increase the blur a little bit. There, now it really looks like it's glowing. All right, let's keep moving. All right, I'll select this next one, and this one works best with things that have lots of corners, called round corners. So obviously that wouldn't work too well on a shape that's already rounded out. So I select the shape, effect, stylize, round corners, preview that, and this effect is almost doing what the live corners would do to a shape. Instead, we don't have a lot of control over which corners that it's rounding because it's kind of a uniform effect that rounds all the corners. If I increase the radius, it's going to pull those corners in. If I decrease it, okay, it's going to make those round off those corners a little more subtly. So I'll do something a little more subtle. Maybe I'll do just 0.2. Click and unclick the preview. Yeah, that looks about right. I'll click OK. Move this down. All right, and let's try this next one. So this next one, scribble, pretty much turning a shape into a scribble texture. So I'll go to the effect, stylize, and scribble. And you can see it's making it look like this has been scribbled with, a marker in kind of a more naive way. We can change the angle of the stroked lines. We can change how far those lines go out from the center. We can change the variation of the line. So it's varying the line from being close to the center to far out. We can vary the stroke width. So if you go too much, it just turns into a blob. If I get really small, then you can start to see these nice fine lines. This one you got to be a little more gingerly with curviness. So I can go from being kind of tight angles to more of a loopy effect. And then I can also add some variation into that. So it looks a little more handmade. You can change the spacing and the variation of that spacing. There's also some pre-set settings for the scribble effect. So everything we just did, we created a custom setting. I could come in here and choose a pre-made setting. Childlike, dense, loose, moire, sharp, sketch, snarl, swash, tight, and zigzag. Kind of like that tight. Alright, so you can choose whatever one you want for that one, and I'll click OK. Okay, and so these last two, they're available, but I wouldn't say they are the most practical effects. But we'll, just to be complete, explore those. I'm going to choose this one, convert to shape, effect, and instead of going to distort and transform or stylize, I'm going to come up here to convert to shape, and we have 3 shapes we can convert this to. It's already an ellipse, so I don't want to convert it into itself. Let's try a rounded rectangle, and we have some options. We can have it relative or absolute. We can decide, hey, we don't want this extra width outside of the bounding box. So I'll pull that in, and we can change the corner radius. If I wanted to, I could have turned that into just a regular rectangle as well. Okay, so this last one, if I choose the shape, I'll go to Effect and crop marks. And let's say I was printing this and I wanted some crop marks just for this object right here. I could go ahead and get those put on there. There's an overview of the Distort and Stylize effects. So we're going to be using these more in our future projects.